Hello, everyone. My name is Leah Willis, and I'm the Chief of Staff at the Echo Institute based out of Albuquerque, New Mexico. We are so excited that Echo partners, ministries of health, funders, and others are joining us from around the world for the launch of our new conversation series, Voices That Echo, which features live interviews with global thought and action leaders whose work transforms lives in communities around the world. So I'm really excited to share with you that we are so fortunate to have with us today Cecilia Conrad, the CEO of Lever for Change. I really couldn't imagine a better way to kick off this series, and frankly, I'm not sure where we'll go from here with such an incredible guest joining us today. I'm not going to take too much time giving you a detailed biography. There's so much that we could say here, but I do want to note a couple of things that I think will be important for our conversation today. Firstly, Cecilia, Dr. Conrad, is one of the brightest stars in philanthropy today, and you don't have to take my word for it. Inside Philanthropy named her to their 50 most powerful women in philanthropy list, and Forbes last year put her on their 50 over 50 impact list. In her current role as CEO for Lever for Change, she's connecting philanthropy with groups with transformative social change potential. Already, Lever for Change has influenced over 2.5 billion in grants and worked with more than 500 organizations around the world. Before joining Lever for Change, Cecilia was a managing director at the MacArthur Foundation, where, among many other things, she led the team that created MacArthur's 100 and Change open call competition to help solve critical problems of our time. She's also a longtime friend and supporter of the ECHO community, for which we are so grateful. So I hope you'll join me in welcoming Cecilia to this conversation today. And we are looking forward to learning from you, Cecilia, about your thoughts on how we can push for big transformative change to improve lives around the world, which is so urgently needed now. So let's get started. Welcome, Cecilia, to Voices That Echo, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. I'm excited to be the inaugural guest.
Thank you very much. Me too. So let's just start off with learning a little bit about you. Could you share with us what should our listeners know about you and where you're coming from as we think about today's topic?
Yes. So I grew up in Dallas, Texas, the American South, 1950s and 60s as an African American girl. And I encountered a lot of closed doors that kept me from participating in some events, closed doors that kept me from attending some schools. And it was somewhat frustrating, both for me personally to be have my options limited, but also, and this says a little bit about me, because I was convinced that I was just as smart as those others and could really offer some great ideas. So I've spent much of my career, once doors have been opened, pushing them wider, trying to hold them open for the people behind me. And when I came to philanthropy from academia, I was kind of surprised at how closed doors were there. Most foundations have invitation only grant processes. It requires that you sort of be part of a network in order to get invited to apply for funding overall. So when I was asked at MacArthur to help design a new initiative, which ultimately became 100 and change, that would give away $100 million to a project that could solve a problem or take a big slice of a problem or unlock the resources required to solve a problem. And the first thing I thought about this is I want this process to be as open as possible. And that's something that we did with 100 and change. And that's something that's built into the mission for Lever for Change. One of our big goals is to move more money. That's number one. We think there's a lot of money still on the sidelines that can be put to good use. But we also want to do that in a way that we believe will help identify the best projects, the best ideas in organizations. And that's through something that's open, transparent, and equitable. And we also interpret open that we want to transfer more agency to the problem solvers and away from sort of a top-down approach that's characterized much of traditional philanthropy. So that's kind of those values were ingrained in me early, and you see that in our design.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you sharing a little bit of your personal background with us and how that influences your work today. And you made one comment about how early on, when you saw a door open, you push it further open, but not only that, holding it for those coming behind you. And that connects with our next question for you about the role of proximal leaders or leaders who are more closely connected with communities as opposed to sort of larger organizations that may be a bit further away from the front line. So the question is, in philanthropy over the last past few years, there has been an emphasis on support directly to communities and proximal leaders. And more recently, there's been an emphasis on supporting organizations that are catalytic, behind the scenes supporters and enablers of those local leaders. For our network of partners and friends from around the world, I think we'd all love to hear your perspective on thinking big and transformation at scale and doing it in a way that ensures that local voices and local leaders are leading that part of the conversation and transformation. So, what do you look for when you're evaluating organizations at Lever for Change and where you're prioritizing your investments?
So my first response to this is both and. And one of the things that we have learned through the open calls, just a little bit of more on the history of that. When we started, our emphasis was on scaling a solution. And so we were focused on giving very, very large grants, 100 million being one, and that's where we first met Project Echo and got to know you. Um, and what we found from that initiative, though, was that the organizations that rated most highly in terms of having a solution that was feasible and scalable and durable tended to be in this kind of either they were single organizations that had a structure of sort of an umbrella or the leader of a network of organizations, or they were collaborations among organizations. And what we learned from that, so Project Echo is one example, right? There's the centralized hub at University of New Mexico, but there are all these other hubs and spoke kind of systems that connect expertise at the local level to expertise at sort of the intermediate level, and then there's an infrastructure provided by Project Echo. We had a similar situation with Community Solutions that works on accelerating and into homelessness. Where they're an organization that comes into local communities to provide sort of backbone support and consulting to the local organizations that are doing the work on the ground. What we observed is that you've got to have both. And part of that involves needing a strong base of organizations at the local level who have the type of expertise that's frequently missing when you only focus on sort of large or national organizations. They understand how the local culture works, they understand how to adapt, they understand who the players are and what the needs are in those communities. But they need to be strong and supported as well. And so what's evolved for us is actually in addition to our big grants that we do through these scaling solutions, we also occasionally run open calls that are focused on strengthening the ecosystem of smaller organizations. Those tend to be general operating support to give them the kind of flexible funding they need to be durable, to be resilient, and then to be able to supply, to be part of that critical larger network.
Thank you so much. And hearing you say that it's a combination of both and of both those larger organizations and also those smaller organizations, which tend to be the more community-based organizations collaborating together for ecosystem change and community level change. With that context in mind, the next question is related to the changes we're seeing, particularly with the government stepping back from supporting a lot of this work. How is that change in the funding environment necessitating new approaches to solving big problems?
Well, as I'm sure most of the people who are listening or participating know, the 2025 has been somewhat tumultuous for nonprofits and for the donors and philanthropists alike. The cuts in USAID funding started it sort of, but there's been these cuts across the board in budgets in the US, cuts to social services, cuts potentially to Medicaid and other sort of things, which are leaving a hole in what was already kind of a thin safety net, at least in the US, and have also sort of had these repercussions worldwide as the US was a major funder of some of the work in global health and economic development. And initially, private philanthropy kind of froze. And they froze for a couple reasons. One is that there was so much going on, so much uncertainty about what changes were going to stick and which ones might be overturned by judicial ruling, that there were philanthropists' first instinct was we need to preserve our capital because we don't know where we're really going to be needed. In the meantime, organizations were needing help immediately. And while there were some philanthropists quietly funding the organizations that were grantees, we know that there are many organizations that were left scrambling overall. And what it points to, I think, is one of the things going forward to be conscious of is the need to have diversity in the sources of revenues, to not be overly reliant on a single source, even though there are arguments for it's cheaper and easier to try and go get one big grant than to go out and do lots of smaller grants. I think what we've all learned is important to consider both. And that includes, in fact, sometimes activating the everyday givers. I think we're going to see increasing emphasis on not only activating smaller givers, sort of campaigns and so on, but also doing it in the areas where the local organizations are, be doing it at the local level, because there is an instinct, certainly among some of the bigger donors, that they need to activate more philanthropic activity beyond themselves in the areas and in the regions where the work is being done. So I think we'll also see some of that. There's also going to be a push for some greater collaboration, consolidation. Collaboration might involve organizations that are engaged in the same type of work, formally merging, or forming among themselves some kind of network that can share infrastructure, perhaps share some back office support to help make them more efficient. So I think we're going to see support from philanthropy for those kind of things happening.
Thank you. That's really helpful to hear both the history and where you see things, how the trends have changed during the course of this year and where you see them going in terms of funding trends. In addition to thinking about more local giving or everyday givers, as well as collaborations between organizations, is there anything else nonprofits can do to adapt to the current funding environment?
Well, it is going to be a more competitive funding environment, particularly in the short term. And that means that there is a need to really make a very solid case for funding. There's going to be a greater emphasis on what systems do you have in place to document and demonstrate the impact you're having. There's going to be a greater emphasis on monitoring and evaluation and learning. So there was already a growth in that, but I'm anticipating we'll see more of that in the future. I think for nonprofits, there is an opportunity to plug into some of the areas where philanthropic interests seem to be moving. There's a growth in interest in science and in public health, particularly because of some of the cuts that have happened. But I think those are seen as areas where if philanthropy is going to focus, that they want to focus some attention on. I'm having many conversations around mental health as well as the physical health. There, at the UNGA, I went to some sessions that were focused on non-communicable diseases. So I think spending some time doing research on what funders have an interest in the specific areas where you may have some expertise would be very valuable.
Thank you for sharing that, not only your perspective, but also the trends that you're seeing at UNGA, the United Nations General Assembly that happened recently in New York. Appreciate that. And you've touched on this next question a little bit, but maybe we can just double click on it to talk a little bit more about collaboration and the role of collaboration in getting to solutions. Um, do you feel that this is something that community-based leaders can do on their own?
They can certainly initiate it, but one of the things that I recognized is that community-based leaders usually already have a full plate. And collaboration is work. It doesn't just happen, right? Um, I'm going to give a local example from here in Chicago because it also illustrates the important roles that donors can play in this. One of our first challenges was something called the Chicago Prize. And it was focused on the south and southwest sides of Chicago, communities that were historically under-resourced. And they offered a $10 million grant. Now, historically, the nonprofits in those areas tended to compete with each other a lot because they saw a limited set of resources available from funders who focused on Chicago. But when you offered a larger grant and gave a lot of flexibility about what that grant could do, one of the things we saw emerge is that those organizations started to talk to each other and they came forth with collaborative proposals for how they could collectively make a dent in on some of the problems in their communities because they could simultaneously address multiple problems at once. They each were bringing a different kind of skill set to the table overall. Um, but built into that proposal also had to be some time and funds to actually make the collaboration happen. You need some ability to sit down, to design what a memorandum of understanding, who's going to do what. You possibly need somebody to coordinate that collaborative activity. And we've seen that as essential. So yes, an individual local community leader can get it started, but also should be think about asking funders to support the collaboration itself in addition to the work.
That's very helpful to hear from both the strategic perspective around collaborations, but also how to operationalize that in a way that will be successful in terms of MOUs and being intentional in what that relationship will be and what the roles will be. So thank you for sharing that
But
guidance.
one little add on that,
Yeah,
and I've
please.
sometimes told organizations you want to make sure too you have a prenup.
Yep.
I've seen situations where the collaborations disentangling them turned out to be the
Mhm.
problem.
And they say when you need one is not the time to write one.
Right.
Yep, gotcha. Yep. That's great. That's helpful advice and very pragmatic. We would expect nothing less from you, both aspirational, optimistic, and also pragmatic. So thank you for sharing that guidance. And before we wrap up, just a couple more questions for you. I just want to open the floor and ask, is there anything we haven't touched on today that you really want to get across to our listeners, which again includes we have Echo hubs and partners, Echo participants, we have funders, we have government stakeholders from within the US here joining us, we have ministries of health joining us, and other nonprofit organizations, many of whom we do partner with, and some that hopefully will be new friends after this, all listening today. Is there anything else that you would like to share with this group?
Well, I'll take a moment to just encourage everyone to sign on to get newsletters from Lever for Change. That's where we announce our open calls. We are currently in the middle of evaluating proposals from the Emerging Climate Leaders Award, which is a global open call looking at youth-led climate organizations. We will have some more open calls coming up in the next year, and this is the best place to find out about them. And for the donors, we also are we very actively share the great projects we've identified through these open calls that we've already vetted. And so you can see them on our website, but you can also reach out because we'll help. We'll do curation for you. Um, that is something that I really want to push the availability of because I know funders sometimes say they're overwhelmed with identifying great projects. We can help with that. Project Echo is one example.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. Um, so that's really helpful to hear as well. So, in addition to encouraging all of our audience today to go to Lever for Change's website, follow Lever for Change and Cecilia Conrad on social media as well, I'd like to ask you one closing question, Cecilia, which is you're so well connected and such an incredible resource and wealth of knowledge on these topics. Is there any other expert in the field or organization that you're currently very excited about that you would encourage this audience to either go to their websites as well or follow them on social media?
So I really hesitated on this question because I hate to have to pick, but I'm
Oh,
going to
fair enough.
but I had a recent one that I just got excited me because it was one I didn't know a lot about. I was at a workshop with Big Wind Philanthropy. That's WIN, Big Wind Philanthropy, which is based in the UK, but one of the leaders is a American originally. But was excited about their model of essentially identifying ministers and governments for who had big ideas and helping to realize those big ideas, but both with funding, but also with help navigating sometimes a complicated international and diplomatic and political sphere. So I was really excited about what they're doing, and I'm keeping an eye on some of what the projects look like.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And with that, we'll close the discussion today. First of all, I want to thank you, Cecilia, so very much for spending time with us. I know you're very much in demand, and we're incredibly grateful for your support of the eco community all over the world. We covered a lot of territory in a very short amount of time. So I just wanted to invite our audience. This has been recorded, and you can share this link. It'll be on Project Echo's LinkedIn page, and hopefully we can share it over to Cecilia as well to share out on her page, and so others can watch this at a later time. So again, Cecilia, just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us, being willing to talk candidly about where you see the highest need and widest pathway for change as we're all navigating these winding roads of current times. So lastly, I just want to say a quick thank you as well to the University of New Mexico Health Sciences Center, where Project Echo is based. And finally, thank you again to the audience. We're so grateful to you for joining us for our very first Voices That Echo conversation. We'll have more of these coming, so please follow us on LinkedIn so that you can get notified when the next ones are scheduled. Thanks, everybody.